Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Meira Neggaz, and I serve very proudly as the Executive Director of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU. I want to welcome some of you back for this, our fifth and last webinar in our When Doors Reopen series. Today's focus is on weekend Islamic schools. I am joined by three really distinguished expert panelists. I'm excited to hear from all three of them. We have Dr. Seema Imam, who's the board chair of the Islamic Schools League of America. We have Tesneem Alkiek, the Director of Expanded Learning at the Yaqeen Institute. And we have Habeeb Quadri, the Superintendent of the Muslim Community Center Academy. I'm not going to go into their full bios. They are all extremely accomplished and experts on this topic, but their full bios will be available in the chat link. So I would encourage you to go and have a quick look at their full bios. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so please put any questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them after we hear from the panelists. Just note that we're going to be sending out links to the resources that we mention, as well as the recording of this presentation, so you will have access. You don't need to take furious notes. You'll get this all in a couple of days. For those of you unfamiliar with ISPU, at ISPU, we envision an America where Muslims are both thriving and equal. And to help us get there, we provide objective research and education about American Muslims and issues impacting Muslim communities to make sure that people are having both well-informed conversations and making well-informed decisions. And we do research and education both on community development issues like the one we're talking about today, but we also research barriers that Muslims face for full equality in our country. We are an applied research organization, which means that we do this research so that folks like all of you who are joining us here today have the evidence-based knowledge and tools that you can apply as you go about strengthening your communities and building bridges of understanding with others. We really hope that today's webinar will be helpful in this regard. The When Doors Reopen series we started just about a month ago, and this series of webinars was really aimed to help us reimagine what could be after the pause of coronavirus. So with mosques and religious spaces closed, how can we come back to the mosque and religious spaces in even a more effective way? There's a lot of discussion about coming back to religious spaces safely, but we also wanted to tackle how to come back even more effectively to meet the needs of our communities. We wanted to take time to reflect on what is working and what could be improved. So today we're tackling the question, are weekend Islamic schools preparing children for life ahead? And obviously, while our research specifically focused on weekend Islamic schools, there are clearly many, many lessons learned also for full-time Islamic schools. It's all pretty applicable. And this decision is really vitally important. Muslims are the youngest of all major faith groups. If we just look at the 18 to 24 age range, nearly 25%, so 1 in every 4 Muslims in America is between the ages of 18 and 24. And this is compared to just 10% of people from other faith groups and from the general public. We also know from our research that young Muslims say that their faith is very important to them. But a lot of those people who say that faith is very important to them don't attend religious services. So there's a real disconnect between the importance of religion in their lives of young people and their practicing and participating in religious spaces. So what happens at this time in schools really paves the way for a large generation, and thus is vitally important. We really need to provide spaces for learning that effectively prepare Muslim children for life ahead. It's very critical. Just to ground this conversation before we hear from the panelists, we wanted to start off by just sharing a very quick snapshot of ISPU's research on this topic. You can find the full report for download at ispu.org, and we will also be sending that as part of the email with resources. But 3 years ago, we held a convening along with the John Templeton Foundation that brought together 14 real experts in the questions around weekend Islamic schools to explore the role and effectiveness of weekend Islamic schools when it comes to character development of the students who attend. The people who participated in this conversation included designers and publishers of Islamic curricula, leaders and teachers of weekend Islamic schools, of which Habeeb Quadri was one participant, researchers and scholar practitioners who had experience working in Islamic schools, and some other experts. We really brought these people together because we wanted to think collectively about the needs, the opportunities, and the challenges within the weekend Islamic schools context, and brainstorm together how initiatives that involve the science of character development can address these identified needs and opportunities and challenges. I wanted to share a couple of very top line recommendations or conversations that came out of these discussions. The number one thing was just there was a pretty unanimous consensus among the group that the development of a good character is really one of the major goals, if not the central goal, of an Islamic education. But there was also a consensus that a lot of weekend Islamic schools were falling short in this particular area. And so one of the recommendations from the group was to expand curriculum, expand the focus beyond memorization of the Quran and add additionally topics such as identity and belonging, behavioral character development, and current and timely topical discussions to allow children to apply their Islamic teachings to real life situations. So the second recommendation really came from that last piece, which was that we needed to enhance the classroom experience and shift to a much more student-centered pedagogy and way of learning. And this recommendation really came from a recognition that, number one, these schools were really meant to prepare young Muslims for the real world. And so curriculum and teaching methods need to be relevant to those students' lived reality. And number two, that there is just the unfortunate reality that so many American Muslim children are often expected to or forced to represent or speak for Muslims in their public schools. And so it was really necessary to help children navigate these realities. But doing so requires a perspective shift. It really means providing some space to discuss and explore ideas rather than just passively having children receive information. And it will require a focus on teaching students how to think, really how to apply the Islamic principles they're learning to their everyday challenges. A third recommendation was around strengthening administrative practices. There was an understanding among the group that in many schools, not all of them, but in many weekend Islamic schools, there was currently little formal governance structures. And there were a lot of diffuse decision makers making, decision-making a little bit challenging sometimes, but that this brought real opportunities, an opportunity to build administrative structures that were conducive to this type of learning, building metrics to measure how well the school is doing, building better structures for parent communication. There was also a recognition that there's a need for greater teacher professional development and engagement in decision-making structures. A lot of teachers are volunteers. There's a heavy reliance on volunteers, and there's a lack of time and funding, as well as overcrowded classrooms, all of which need to be addressed by strengthening governance structures. The last thing I'll note is just that there was also a recognition throughout the day that infused almost every conversation we had, that there simply is a dearth of data. There's just a real lack of data around who is attending weekend Islamic schools, who's missing from schools, where the gaps are, why people might be being left out. Are people, leaving at a certain age, and what those reasons might be. And the lack of data on all of these questions really hinders our ability to make evidence-based decisions. The report, ISPU's report, has a ton of recommendations, very specific recommendations to apply to all of the things I just mentioned. We have recommendations on curriculum development, on teacher professional development, on school administrative structures, data gathering, learning across the interfaith space, and taking good models from other faith groups to apply in our own schools, and recommendations around innovation and technology utilization. And I think we're going to get into some of that as we hear from the three panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to very happily introduce our panelists and pick up on this conversation. And we're going to start with Dr. Imam. Dr. Imam, just from your long time experience in this field, I have sort of two related questions for you. First, what do you think character development actually looks like within the context of Islamic schools? And what are some of the ways that Islamic schools can instill that in Muslim children? And the second question that's related is, what do you think some of the obstacles are? We talked a little bit about some of the obstacles that Islamic schools face in educating Muslim youth, but what do you think some of the other ones are, if you'd like to expand on anything I already mentioned?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this great conversation. What a mouthful, Meira. What a mouthful. There is so much to consider that it's really hard to know where to jump in. You gave some really good points. I identified with many of them. So just to give context, years ago, late 70s to 90s, early 90s, I was involved in a weekend school. While being a professional public school teacher, then I've been a principal at a full-time Islamic school, and the last 20 years, I've been again principal also of a weekend school. So when we come to speak about weekend schools, the challenges are many. Who attends? Brave parents send their children to weekend Islamic schools, and strong parents, because many parents can't win the battle with their kids. Many parents aren't able to get their kids to come to weekend Islamic school. So schools really need to be not only character developing schools and places for the children, safe spaces, as you said, but they also need to be created so that kids want to run to the Islamic school. Kids want to be there. People need to treat them really well. We know in education that relationships are the #1 reason for successful teachers to be successful, when they build relationships with their students. And that builds character. That means they're role models. We need lots of role models. And that means that teachers can't lose their cool. Teachers can't get frustrated. They can't be, pushy too much about homework and other things. They need to hold kids accountable. But at the same time, they really need to have a great understanding in order to teach character. They have to show character. They have to demonstrate character. They have to be really firm in it, really consistent in it. If it boils down to allowing high schoolers to have donuts, bring the donuts. Bring the donuts. If they need the donuts and they don't eat breakfast and their parents push them in the car, then welcome them with things they need. They will see your character. They will see your caring. They will see your attempt to have, closeness with them, to listen to them. Not to wait for them to talk and then tell them to stop, but to wait for them to talk and then show interest, make eye contact. Find respectful ways to bring them back. But if we're going to teach character education in weekend Islamic schools, we have too little time. I did the math. It's like 2% of their week could be spent in a 4-hour program. I have 4 hours. I feel now like I'm speed talking because there's so much I'd like to say. But 2% of a child's life every week for only 39 weeks is not very much. So we have to work through being an example, being the caring, nurturing person, modeling ourselves after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. I teach the high school class in the Northwest Indiana Islamic Center, where I'm the principal and have been for 20 years. I teach that class with the intention of doing what I just said, making the students glad that they came. We do things with digital tools. They make videos, they make infographics. They turn their assignments around into something that's not their usual assignment in an Islamic school. We try not to make it boring or dull. So to teach character education, we're going to have to be firm in that belief that it's all about relationships. And here's a problem. Most or many of the Islamic schools do not have qualified educators, and you mentioned that. And a lot of times, nothing against immigrants. I happen to be born and raised on a farm, so I'm an immigrant to the city. Whatever you want to say, we're all in this together. It doesn't matter. I have an accent that someone may not like because I have an American accent, but there are accents that interfere with children's learning sometimes. And so we have to find ways to figure out who's in front of the children. It also helps to have a Western context, an upbringing, an identity with children so that they can see that you're not, you're not faking it, you lived it. Telling your own story and stories about your own children is helpful to students today in this context. Going to school full-time only gets them 17% of their week. So 2%, 17%, yet it's so much more organized, it's cleaner, it's neater, it has, more people to interact with, it has governance. If someone doesn't feel like doing something in a weekend school, they might not do it. Kids might be counting on that. So there are many things. We don't have much extracurricular. Even full-time Islamic schools often lack extracurricular things. So that's a deficit for our schools. Well, I would agree with you that one of the biggest impediments in us making a difference is that we don't have the research. Many of us are researching now. As the chair of the Islamic School League of America, we're researching on lots of topics, but we need that data because most of our children, maybe 95% of our children in America don't really get to go to any Islamic school. I don't know the numbers, but it's sure a small piece compared to those that don't. So is it 90? Is it 95? Does that matter? Well, we'd like to know, but that means we have to work hard. And I will tell you that in a place where there's an Islamic school, then a weekend Islamic school, there's no reason why you don't attract every single child to go there. You have to make a way, find a way for them to come. Don't stress on clothing. Don't stress on hairdos and haircuts. Stress on things that welcome them. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, dealt with all kinds of people. And he dealt with them based on who they were, what they could handle. And you win people by doing that. And so we would win our students by doing that. I can think of many stories that I could tell you. In fact, young people who've come up to me and told me, thank you. And I would say, for what? Don't you remember me? No, you have a beard. I don't know who you are. Well, you should remember me. Okay, let me look. I don't look at faces normally of grown men with beards, but let me look. Are you in the family of such and such? Yes, yes. And you made me do such and such. I did? Yes. And what are you telling me this for? Because it changed my life. And so that's what this is about. Islamic school education is not supposed to be about the things that we make it about. It's supposed to be about relationships and understanding of Islam, and caring and committed educators can do that. The other problem that I want to bring, and I don't know how much time I have, a problem of understanding the Quran. To me, it's not, it's not difficult. We have to realize that our children do not read Arabic, do not understand the Quran in Arabic, so we should change the Arabic in the Quran class so that we incorporate a good translation into that classroom, so that children can understand in their modern day view contemporary English translation of the Quran. And there is one. It's called The Gracious Quran by Dr. Ahmed Zaki Hamad. He was 2-term president of ISLA. And it means that the children cannot read English in Shakespearean style. We're not in UK. We're in US of A. And we need modern contemporary English that a person who doesn't know Arabic can read and weep. Like you hear the weeping of people in Tarawih prayer because they understand. Understanding has to be made possible. So demonstrating our love of Islam, demonstrating our love of all students, even when they're a little bit difficult, is how we are going to succeed with some of the students. And these challenges can only be put to rest when we realize that we are a team with the parent. The parent gets 50% of a student's time. And then they get summer, which is much different. The 50% is for the time during the school year. If we want our Islamic weekend schools to succeed, we have to tandem and build teams between parents and the school. Islamic weekend schools won't succeed unless we make the parents part of the team. And too often they drop and pick. So you have to have breakfast for them. Bring in breakfast, have an event, have them be involved in something. But realize that, you know, those parents know their children better than we ever will. And so we need them to be part of the equation. And I hope that, I pointed out that, yes, we are doing character development, but we're not doing it in a program called character development because we don't have time. The 4 hours is divided in 4 subjects: Arabic, Quran, Islamic studies, and Seerah. Little taste of Seerah, little taste of Quran, little taste of Arabic, little taste of Islamic studies is a big challenge. So I hope that I tried to give us what we need to hear and what we need to think about.
That was wonderful, Dr. Imam. Thank you. You brought up so many great points that we'll probably pick up on later with the Q&A. So we'll come back to you. I do want to pose a question though to Habeeb Quadri. One of the things that I mentioned, and Dr. Imam picked up on this, is about professional development and teachers. Many Islamic weekend schools rely on volunteers and uncertified teachers to lead in the classroom. So what role does professional development play in preparing those volunteers to meet the needs of their students, and how do we go about doing that?
It's a great question. And you know, it's funny, I'm a Sunday school graduate, and one of my teachers was Dr. Seema Imam, I think in 4th, 5th grade. So there is a difference when you have someone who has the tools, who has gone through the process, from another teacher who has the passion for it, but maybe not the right tools because they never really had the pedagogy to teach kids, right? So, and I know a lot of our weekend school teachers are passionate. You know, they want to do something, they want to make a change, but how to make that change is very important. And I think having that professional development skills, and I understand that a lot of our volunteers or even paid weekend school teachers are not all in the field of education, right? And I think that becomes a big thing. And I think one of the first things is for them to understand the psyche. And then I'm going to kind of connect back to this character, because one of the first areas that we have to realize that, no doubt about it, our kids need to understand the foundation, right? The 5 pillars, the Quran, the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. But even what we have to do is make our teachers in a professional development and understand and say, look, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about fiqh and, you know, the way of life, Sharia, but when you go ahead and say, well, like 1/4 of it is really, you know, huququllah, right? And our, and the other aspect is huququl ibad, or what you call mu'amalat, right? When you're dealing with others, you're dealing with circumstances. And if you think about a kid who's there for 1 week on a Sunday or a Saturday or even a night, majority of the time, he wants to figure out, how am I going to go ahead and live my life throughout those 6-7 days? Because that's my 4 hours out of another 70 to 100 I don't know, 72 to more hours that I'm going to deal with other kids and so on and so forth. And where does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk about this? And I think sometimes we get so caught up making sure, hey, they know this, and not taking some time for them to make sure they understand that the spiritual, the emotional aspect, because our faith is not just the cognitive. So that's why it's so important in the professional development and say, hey, look, yes, you know your content, that's no doubt about it. But one of the biggest key is to understand the context, right? And if that means in the professional development, do we get individuals who are in the field, not just a religious field? Sometimes you just have like, well, I have someone who's religious who's going to just train you to make sure you know Islam very well, but someone who's a social worker to say, look, the psyche or the psychologist who knows the psyche of a child and how to deal with it. Our teacher, what's the best way to disseminate that information to the child is something that we have to now, the weekend school or any school has to, for us to kind of think about and say, well, okay, when we do get someone, who are we getting and what is it for, right? And that's the key factor, is that making sure you get the right person who understands and says, hey, look, and has that experience. And I think that plays a big factor in helping. And that means sometimes you have to get someone from the outside. Even in the class, there might be a topic that you might say, you know, for the first 6 weeks, I could do these 2 topics. I might have to bring someone in. Or do I go ahead and get a video, which I know Sister Tesneem Meira rewards some of the work they're doing, and she could kind of discuss that. So you'll see that there are other avenues that there wasn't maybe 20 years ago. There are more people in the education field. There are more resources out. But the thing is, how do we help solidify and make everyone go ahead and move forward? So then that becomes the other aspect. It's like, hey, making sure the programs. I'm a big believer more and more is that we have to have experiential learning, right? So one is that we could talk about character. So if that means out of the 4 weeks, and we take the last month, the last Sunday of the month, or the last Saturday of the month, and say, hey, the middle school students, the lower kids, they love you, and if you can keep it entertained, they'll get there. But when you start changing the 6, 7, 8 grade, the pre-teens, teenage years, why not do an experiential learning? Why not say, you know, we've talked about being gratitude and being thankful. Why not go ahead and do a food drive? Or let's go to a soup kitchen. Or you know what, respecting our elders, let's go ahead and volunteer one day or at a senior elderly home, right? I think adding that component and saying, hey, what, you know, we could get volunteers, you could get youth groups, or even some of these same kids as they're getting older to come back and say, you know what, you're in 7th, 8th grade, one period, you go back and teach first graders. Because now when you're teaching, right, you know, it shows learning, the greatest form of learning is through experience and through teaching others. So I remember I used to complain about weekend school. And my father said, if you have a problem, do something about it. And so at the age of 14, I became a teacher in pre-K as an aide, and then going to teaching, and then, you know, and alhamdulillah, I enjoyed it. But I think those kind of aspects are going to be very important. And when we talk about professional development, is looking at it not just content-based, but the context-based, finding the right resources of people to help train them to understand that it is not just about teaching the content, which is very important. You need the tools, but how does it be implemented in their life? And that's what Tarbiyah is, right? That's what our deen is. Our deen is the spirit, the cognitive, the spiritual, the emotional, physical, all of that. And I think the more we talk about that, and the kids and the questions that they come out with, and even bringing it back and saying, what are some of the new topics that we need to rearrange our own curriculum? So that's professional development also looks at it and say, well, maybe we not just have to go by the book. But a lot of times people ask, what's the best book? I said, look, book is there, but what is the content and what do you think your kids need, right? And in the discussions, and that way you can make some adjustments. And I think those are going to be key factors for us to kind of think about. And I know in the Q&A we could discuss more, but these are some thoughts.
That's great, Habeeb. Thank you so much. And I love the continuation between Dr. Imam training you, teaching you becoming a superintendent. She clearly did a great job. So thank you.
For this young lady over there.
Fantastic. Tesneem, and we'll come back to you, Habeeb, in the Q&A. But Tesneem, Habeeb, all three of us mentioned resources and materials, and Yaqeen Institute does amazing, sort of resource development. Can you share a little bit what type of resources are available from Yaqeen for educators, administrators, and parents? And why did Yaqeen decide to focus on developing these resources?
Thanks for that. But before I start, I do have to mention that Habeeb was a mentor of mine growing up as well. So I feel like I just need to complete the chain. So it's amazing to be with.
I feel very left out here.
So no, it's great to be with everyone here. But really, like a lot of these questions came up in terms of how we wanted to address, what we want to do with our content, with the Yaqeen papers that we're doing. And for those of you who are not familiar with Yaqeen and the work we do, we address a very specific niche within, the larger intellectual discourse. Basically, that we're dealing with specific topics about people's faith, about conviction, building that conviction within both a Muslim community and a non-Muslim community, and is dismantling doubts. So really the purpose of that is sort of like it culminates into what Brother Habeeb was saying, in that we want people, again, we want to have those Islamic values, you want and to inspire that conviction, remove all of the doubts. Yes, it's important, but really the ultimate goal of our work at Yaqeen is to inspire contribution. And so the point is that you're supposed to be learning about those values, building that conviction in order to translate that into direct action. And so some of the examples that were given before are extremely important and absolutely needed. And one thing that we tried to focus on was, okay, so those are all, there's so many different aspects of this conversation. What are ways that we can contribute to this conversation sort of intellectually, right? And because of our work that we're doing, because of the focus of Yaqeen's mission, we realize that we have very specific topics that are not being addressed within the Muslim community at large, let alone with a younger audience, which is a more crucial time, right? You want to be getting at a middle school age, a high school age, addressing these topics that are going to, young adults are going to be confronted on, head on during their undergraduate years and later on in life. And so we decided to create a curriculum that, for now, we're starting off as addressing those, those very important topics are often not addressed by the existing Islamic curricula, the books that are available, because we're addressing them from, I'd say, like a unique perspective, in the sense that we're not going through just theology, fiqh, seerah, but we're asking specific questions. Well, why do you even believe that the prophet was a prophet? Let's take a step back, because a lot of these classes were saying, well, the prophet was a prophet, therefore we believe X, Y, Z. But a lot of these students now are being forced to ask, are being pressured to ask, or they're coming up with these questions themselves. Well, wait, why do we even believe in God? Why do we even believe in a prophet? All of this stuff. So we're addressing these topics. We're sort of complementing the topics that are already being addressed, but from this unique perspective. And I think that's really important, because a lot of times by providing this curriculum, we're essentially holding, these volunteers' hand and walking through step by step how you can explain these topics. And I say that particularly that we're holding their hands because the way we've created our curriculum was very much with weekend school teachers and volunteers in mind. We recognize the fact that weekend school, most our teachers are volunteers or don't have that much experience. And so they find themselves, whether it's flustered, they don't have the time to put these things together, they don't have the knowledge base that, hey, we're gonna do the work for you, we're gonna put the content together, we're going to explain all these different activities and discussion questions, we're going to give you that background information in the event that you need that help. And if you don't, take the activities, take the videos, take whatever you want and run with it. But the point is we're trying to make things easier, and we're trying to address those questions from that very specific perspective. Because what's happening is that what we ultimately want to do is we want to ask that question is a high school student graduating, what is their Islamic literacy going to look like? What kind of knowledge are they going to have? And of course that, along with all of these values and the character development that should be tightly embedded in all of this, is you want to be looking at that final product, is what do you want that high school graduate looking like? And we want to be able to say that, hey, they walked away with those core foundations, those core topics, but they also walked away with the ability to know how to think. So that, I think that's a very crucial aspect too. And that's something that neglected across the board within a lot of our spaces, is that here are the facts, this is what you need to know, this is what you believe, memorize it all, live your life kind of in that sort of attitude. But it's only when you learn how to think that it's not that, okay, we worship God, we believe in the prophet, but these are all the building blocks we get to in order to come to that conclusion, that then once you have that mindset, you can replicate it across the board. And that's especially important when it comes to character development as well, because if you're just told, you're just told to be a good person, and you have no reason, you don't know exactly why am I arriving at that conclusion? Yes, you absolutely want to be in a space where you're encouraged, and you have those weekly outings, as Brother Habeeb mentioned. You have active measures in place to sort of build that habit within your students. At the same time, you want them to be able to think. Like, if someone says, well, why do you even have to donate money, or why do you provide soup kitchens? You have better things to do in your time. That they have, again, that mindset to take points A, B, and C, put them all together and really think for themselves. And so all of these are different aspects that are sort of embedded in a way throughout the curriculum. Is, again, by approaching these unique topics, you're asking very specific questions to teach students not only how to think, but also to be more confident overall. And with that confidence of knowing just more about who you are and building that identity, which is extremely important, that's when you sort of let go of the shackles and you're able to contribute to your fullest degree. Because for as long as someone is still confused about what they believe, who they are, their identity as an American Muslim, or whatever, identities that they hold, there's only so much they're going to be able to contribute back to society, because they're spending so much of their internal energy with that internal conflict. And you want to be able to give students this confidence, give them this confidence in order to then to focus on what's really the most important aspect of being, a Muslim student and a Muslim young adult, whatever it is, which is that character development, having those values and living by those values. And with that, I'll go ahead and conclude.
Thank you so much, Tesneem. The curriculum, the resources that Yaqeen offers are incredible. So I would encourage everyone to check some of those out, and we'll be sending some of those links along with other resources when we send out the recording. So definitely have a look. So we're definitely starting to get some questions. For those of you who are participating, please feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box. I'm going to start with a question we got actually prior to the webinar, and Dr. Imam, you mentioned this as well, just kind of the short period of time, especially in weekend Islamic schools, that you have children for. So the question was really around how on earth can you balance, teaching the Quran, Arabic, and Islamic studies, as well as doing all of these other sort of, character building activities or discussions. How can you do that effectively in such a short period of time and once a week? It's a hard order.
Well, I don't ever tell people who come to register their children in weekend Islamic school that we're going to solve everything for them. I tell them that they need to register and have perfect attendance. That will give us the maximum time with their children, but that they need to check with the teachers all the time to make sure that whatever they are supposed to work towards, such as it's frequently memorization, which I want some of that, we need some of that. But many parents still focus a lot on that. And so we don't want them to redo stuff they already did in that little bit of time that we have. So we want parents to share so that children can keep moving. We want to use iPads sometimes, but let's face it, they can use iPads at home. So we want the teacher to interact with them, in the classroom. So I tell teachers to start your class period with a warm welcome. I tell them you must call everyone by name. Help them to sit up and feel good about being there. If you need to bring some snacks, I tell them, I allow them to do that. We focus on healthy food. We practice things like, what are the things in the Quran that you could put in soup? And then, can we make 6 different kinds of soup? And then we do. And the kids figure out what they could put in soup that's got to be named in the Quran. The only thing we allow extra is salt and pepper. The rest has to come from their research, their investigation. And then we have 6 kinds of soup. Then they tell their parents about the soup and the concept behind, look at the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for us in the Quran. So our book is not an old, outdated book. Our book is relevant to our lives. I talk to them about things that I grow at home. I grow plants. Sometimes that we eat in my living room. I grow alfalfa, for example, for a salad, and hydroponics. I tell these stories to kids. We have to make life connections in the short period of time that we have, particularly to the Quran. I like us to focus on the Prophet's life, peace and blessings be upon him, thematically rather than historically and repetitively overall, the people in his life, the dates in his life, the age that he was. I'm sorry, I'm over it. You know, what's the real value of knowing? And so there's a good book written by Dr. I'm going to forget his name. One of his names is up there. Maybe that's his last name. But anyway, he's a doctor, he's a physician. He wasn't writing books, but he knew this problem of understanding how can you love someone you don't know? That's the point in Sira. Teach the children how they can love someone they don't know. They need a lot of details about that person so that they can embody a love for that person that they're never going to meet. And when it comes to Arabic, there's a constant debate. Are they going to learn much? Are they going to be able to understand much? I like to focus on vocabulary words. If they can learn words like Rabb, you know, that they're going to recognize this is Lord whenever they see it or whenever they hear it. And there's so many. And you can use all the Iqra books. They have nice vocabulary lists. But, you know, that's what it boils down to, is making a decision in that short amount of time to really make it relevant to their lives.
Great, thank you. Habeeb, Tesneem, would you like to add anything?
You're muted.
Oh, can you hear me?
No, you were not muted. Habeeb was muted.
Oh.
Habeeb
sorry.
is muted, yeah.
As educators, it is, I think, very important, especially at the weekend school. You know, look, we have to understand it is 2-3 hours. So we got to maximize what we could do. But then we also need to educate, even like professional development for teachers. We need to do some workshops for our own parents to show that just like any other field, when it comes to academics, the secular education, Monday through Friday, you know, just learning in the classroom is good. But when you want to become great at something, or you wanted to be good, really good at something, you work on it, right? You know, kids will do extra math, or they're going to work on it. They're going to kids who read extra for home for pleasure score in the 80, 90 percentile. If you're good, you want to be good in an instrument, or you want to be good in sports, it's the extra practice. And I think it's so important that we also provide and say, well, here's something that you can do. So just as an example, like Dr. Seema brought up, like, okay, here's a project you could do, which the child's getting involved, but somehow the parents are going to have to be involved, plays a big part. And I think we have to realize and reinforce that once a week. Just like if you don't pray any other day and just come for Jummah, yeah, you could get a spiritual upliftment, but hey, that day, why does Allah make us day to day 5 times each day? Not even once a day, but throughout the day, because we need constant reminders. So I think that's another aspect for us to kind of realize, to reinforce the concepts that we want, is not a commitment of the child, but also the commitment of the parent. Now, I know that might be tough, but that means commitment is not just dropping them off and going shopping. But like I always said, one of the reasons I could never complain to my parents is because when I said, wow, I didn't like this, but I knew they themselves were there teaching, or they had their own Quranic tafsir at 12 o'clock. And it wasn't like when I was mad that I never got to see a Bears game in the 80s when they were good, right? Because we had no YouTube, could watch a video back in the days, no Facebook. So there was no taping games. So I missed great years, right, of Walter Payton, right? And I was mad, but I couldn't say anything because my dad and my mom were also there. And I think that's another area that as we talk, and all the weekend school principals are full-time, even full-time, any educators, we know that when your parents' involvement, kids do good. That's just in life. Anywhere you have others involving that village kind of getting together. So having that, and the other thing of flip model of saying, okay, you know what, now that we have this, but here's some extra videos for you to watch. Just like why Khan Academy is so popular. I didn't get something in class, here's a video, let's reteach it, here's an assessment. So now something like this is now you have Yaqeen, where you're having kids having these doubts, questions, they have a resource to go, a safe resource with proper, people who understand the deen is very important, right? So you have, I think those become outlets, right? Where you have these, the youth groups and stuff that could reinforce some of these same concepts. And I think that's where weekend schools can start connecting with these other organizations.
Great, thank you both. Tesneem, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add one resource that I forgot to mention. I think that's something that ties in really well is that we created something called Conversations. And this was really heavily intended for parents and their children. So we created, it's basically a deck of cards where every deck of cards handles a different topic. So for example, why does evil exist? And the way each card works is that you're asking very basic, simple questions. You're reflecting on certain things. You're watching a 5-minute clip. You're going online and you're searching some things. But basically the way the cards were made was that they were made to make conversations with your children easier. So for example, say this over the weekend, weekend school, you did, a certain topic. You're doing some of these foundational topics. Why does God exist? What is the Sharia barbaric? And you don't know how to start that conversation. And, you want to be able to help, you want to be supportive, but you yourself as a parent might not know what to do or how to go about it. And that was one of the big reasons that we created this, was that, hey, we're going to provide the questions for you. We're going to walk you through how you can have this conversation and make your kids think, but you'll be involved in that process along the way. And so that's one thing that perhaps will make things easier for those who are interested.
That's great, Tesneem. Thank you. Just to pick up on this question of parents, because we have a couple of questions around how to get parents engaged. How do you actually, you have all mentioned a couple of things that people can do and the ways teachers can communicate with parents. Do you have any other tips on getting parents more involved and excited about their kids going to weekend Islamic schools? There seems to be amongst the questions a feeling that it's sort of, they're just doing it, to do it, but not really getting too involved.
I could add a little bit. I'm a mother of many kids and a grandmother of 11 now. And some went to Islamic schools full-time, some went to weekend schools, some didn't make it very regularly. It's a dilemma sometimes. I think you have to meet the parents directly where they are, and they're all in a different place. And isn't that Islamic? Isn't that modeling, what the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, did? So some parents are willing to come inside and participate in a short lesson or gathering. Some need to talk to you privately. They don't know anything. They can't come for prayer. They don't know how to pray. So they're not coming near the school. And they're not going to let their kids feel embarrassed because their parents don't pray, because kids will say, hey, why is your dad not praying with us? So there are huge problems that we face that we don't know the problem. It's hidden, it's veiled. We also have huge problems in our community that no one ever talks about. Problem after problem after problem, that people feel embarrassed that they have that problem. And really, we need to let that go. So I often say to parents, you probably have a problem you're not telling me about. I could have had something similar. I could write a book about my problems, but I haven't had time. But don't feel shy to ask others to help you solve your challenge. That's what Islam is about. That's what the mosque is supposed to be doing, making everyone feel welcome. And everyone needs a friend. So take the parent life where my school is out in the middle of cornfields and say to yourself, what's the percentage of time that this mother and father spend on Islamic learning? And then you get an answer to why they're not doing a lot of the teaching with their kids. What was their upbringing? How many of them went to Islamic school and really understand the same amount of Arabic that their kids are getting an opportunity to get? It's really, the problem is not they don't care. The problem is not they don't want. The problem is not a lack of love. Usually the problem isn't even a lack of money, but it can be. And I've told kids before, when they borrow money from me for pizza, they keep borrowing it week after week. I draw them aside and I talk to them about owning and debt and, and money. And then I have a couple of times paid them $10 and said, this is a gift. But if you have any debt, go and pay your debt. And it's really to me for the pizza in the past, you know, and then I figure out a way to allow them on my dime to eat pizza. So helping families solve their problems. If parents are fed up with hearing, can I get pizza? Can I get pizza? They come with a handful of change if money's the problem. And you can see for a while it's nickels and dimes and pennies that they took from a drawer. And it's sad. I feel like crying sometimes. So what is the problem? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it lack of time? Is it lack of, you know, and help the parents instead of saying, oh, you, parent, aren't doing enough for your children. As Muslims, we're all in this together, and their challenge in the week in their life as Muslim parents is huge too.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's very helpful advice. We had a question about theological traditions. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. The question was around the topic of different sects, such as Sunni and Shia, is rarely discussed in Islamic schools. Is there any curriculum around this so that Muslims can focus on the approach of one ummah? So, and I know this question of theological traditions was brought up in our convening that we did as well. So just wondering if someone would like to touch on that topic.
Talk a lot, go ahead.
Is a question like, you know, the idea is like, you know, I think it's so important. Now, is there like a certain curriculum? You know, most it depends on, you know, which curriculum, if they even have that discussion. But I know, like, especially when it gets to middle school, it is a discussion that kids want to have. A lot of times in Islamic, when they go to public schools and they talk about the Middle Eastern history, that it's a discussion they need to have a better understanding. What is Sunni Shia, right? And I think those are conversations. And then you have Muslims who are from both, right? Different areas. In your Michigan, it's wide. You know, you have a big population of Sunni Shia population. So having those understandings, I think these are things why it's so important that you have to look at your own school and seeing what are some topics that sometimes are more important to be discussed because of your demographics than maybe somewhere else, some others. Then the other aspect, even if there is difference of opinions on something, even when it comes to, like, you know, I like, even, you know, I'm being at a full-time school, like we have 46 different countries in our school, right? So you have also different views, and you have cultural views and really, you know, religious views. But sometimes you have a first grader talking about, hey, that's not, you know, your mom brought you McDonald's chicken. Hey, that's haram. I'm like, okay, stop, right? So you have all these conversations where they might go, hey, is it okay, ahlal kitab, whatnot. So there are going to be those conversations that something that we might have talked about in middle school. Sometimes we have to have like a small general conversation, even in first, second grade, where we're like, okay, this is coming up. So I think that's going to have to be something that as administration, figure out the topics, then also educate your teachers, because that doesn't mean the teacher knows, right? That's the other key factor, is that when you have this topic, then who's going to present that? Does you need someone else to come out and present? That's going to be something that's very important. And the other thing I just wanted to kind of follow up was what Dr. Seema Imam brought, is that it's also good in your admin team to have someone who's going to deal with the parents who could ask those tough questions. Not everyone's great about, like, you know, to confronting. And so sometimes you have to have those people who could talk to the parents about concerns they might have, and even just telling a teacher, hey, you know, I need you to figure this out, and this is how you could do this better. So I think it is something that should be discussed. You need to look at, you know, and be open to these open discussions. And sometimes when you, at the start of the year, ask middle school kids, what are some topics that you want to talk about? We had to, and like even in our community, we have a very, we have like again, like a smiley community, which is, you know, and so there was a big discussion where the public school wanted to have the Muslim club under all one. They had a separate one, like, well, why don't you just come together, right? But then I'm like, well, some of us pray Jummah, they don't pray Jummah. We pray, they did Jamaat Khana. There are some major maybe differences, right? So those were conversations that we had to have with our own kids, but then also their community, where like, hey, you know, and the school, where they were like, oh, just combine all these Muslims into one and just call it the one big Muslim Students Association. And then so they are things that have to be brought up. And the kid's like, hey, what should we do, Mr. Q? I'm like, all right, let's kind of talk about this. So.
And I will add that there are lots of other besides this point of other.
Yes.
You know, and so
you could go from there.
Yeah, I mean, you can just go nuts. I used to have this problem trying to explain to my kids, your teacher didn't really mean that all Americans are bad,
Yes.
or that Christians are bad, or that your grandmother is going to hell. And I used to be like throwing my hands up like, I'm explaining one thing over here and you all are ruining everything because, you know, what did the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, do with the woman or the man who were different? You know, there was a funeral passing by and I believe the woman was Jewish. And someone said, why are you standing for the procession? She was Jewish. And he said, she's human, right? So these lessons that are left out, you know, we've had in our weekend Islamic school more than once, but a continuous period of time. I want to say in my 20 years there, probably about 15 years with a Shia family. And we learned from them and they learned from us. And we tried our level best to have kids respect one another. And it was really not much of an issue ever because we, you know, I don't know because, but it's a mindset that you're going to be somewhere different if you're rigid and you know, oppressive, and you're going to be somewhere different if you're like willing to understand others. Everyone deserves a right to be safe. I saw another question. And there are going to be a lot of challenges to Islamic ideology, beliefs, and practices around LGBTQ. But we need that discussion too. And we need to have that discussion so that we allow worshipers to worship. And children just need to get an opportunity, and along with their parents, you know, to have the hard conversations.
Thank you so much. We only have like 2 minutes left. I want to just quickly ask one final question and then we are going to close out. But is there anything any of our panelists could share on the use of technology and innovation? There was 1 or 2 questions around, you know, mosques and schools are largely closed at the moment because of COVID. Are there, you know, how do you feel about online learning? Are there resources? Is it effective? Just a quick comment or two on that and the use of technology.
Wow. I'm teaching teachers about technology for the last 10 or 15 years and teaching teachers about online teaching as well. And I've been hitting my head against a wall in the ISLA forums to say, teachers of Islamic schools, you know, get on board with technology, learn the ISTE standards. Learn about the EEE so that you can evaluate your digital tool that you're going to use in your lesson and see if it's good or if it's just a technology. Wow, we use technology. So I like the idea of the online learning. I really advise, and as the chair of the Islamic School League of America, I've been advising schools to slow down, take it easy. There's no rush. There is an allowance for us to return to schools. But there's no absolute need to rush. So we could perfect, here in the summer, we have 2 months, July and August, we could improve and perfect a stance on Islamic education for full-time Islamic schools and weekends too, on online learning, and then stick to it for the first 10 weeks of the school year. I know it will be challenging for parents, but I think we would save ourselves a lot of potential challenges around COVID-19. Then we would have our skills together. Then we could go back to school, inshallah, in a different way. But now we're going back haphazard, like we're gonna have some children come Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and some come Thursday and Friday, morning and evening. There's 2 starts to the day, 2 pickups to the day, all kinds of challenges, all kinds of headgear and sanitizing, all of these things. So if you could do the online learning longer and really focus on, you know, teaching and learning digitally, I think it would be a good thing. I don't know if Habeeb wants to add to that. He's got to deal with parents who need their kids in school. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, no, it's good. Well, there's online right there at Tesneem. What do you guys got?
And that's me.
Yeah. One resource we actually developed in response to COVID was something called Classroom, where we took the curriculum that we had built for teachers to be using, but then modeled it online. So it was hosted by Brother Saad Quadri, and he went through our entire curriculum. But of course, the curriculum that we originally had was activity-based, discussion-based, a lot of moving around the classroom. And now that we were presented with the challenge of how do we make this all entirely online. So we show really like a sort of sample of how that can look like, adding different videos, changing the questions to make them online based. So I think that's a really good example if you want to see how that can look like, that model. And of course that can be used as well, whether you use it, all of our resources are available online for free. So you can take our presentations with all our videos and questions and activities, or for parents who don't have students in weekend schools or Islamic schools, you can have them actually attend that class online and participate online from home.
Great, thank you so much. This conversation could certainly go on for a lot longer. I know there are a bunch of questions that we were unable to get to. We will try to answer some of them in the follow-up email. A couple of things before we end. You will see, the participants will see, there's just a very quick three-question survey. If we could ask you to answer those questions, that would be extremely helpful in terms of our own metrics and data gathering. I do want to thank the panelists profoundly for sharing their wisdom with us today and their just amazing experience. I really appreciate all of your time and expertise, so thank you all so very much. I want to thank you all who've joined us for joining us. I hope that you found this helpful and that you have some tips and ideas that you can take back to your own settings and put into practice. Look out for an email with lots of resources. You can find more resources at ISPU.org as well as at Yaqeen.org, right? Is it YaqeenInstitute.org? Yep. And
ISLA.org.
ISLA.org, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, all three of those places are great places to look for resources, and we'll send you links to all of them. So take just 2 seconds to answer those 3 questions, and thank you all so very much.